Okay, so we've got a render that looks pretty good. I know I don't have my textures on this. This is just shaders. But I've got a render. Now I'm going to bring it into Photoshop and kind of give it the finishing touches. So there's a few different things that we can do. We can do color grading. We can fix little render errors if there's little spots that we just need to kind of smooth out. If there are seams in our textures, we can fix those with the clone brush or the healing brush. We can add vignettes. We can add kind of fake depth of field. We can overlay, dust and scratches. We can add some chromatic aberration to make it look like it was taken with a real camera. A bunch of things you can do. Actually, I'm going to refer you to this site right here, LifeWire. They've got this lovely two-part article about how you can finish a 3D render in post. So your raw render should never be your final image. So the first thing it talks about is rendering additional passes. So you can do a depth of field pass. We're only going to worry about the ambient occlusion pass, which, by the way, that reminds me, I had a small mistake in the last video. Once you're done rendering your ambient occlusion in the render settings here, you don't want to go back to the default integrator. Come on. Oh, it didn't want to load my... Well, it just didn't load RenderMan for some reason. You don't want to go back to the default integrator. You want to go to path tracing. So I'm just going to quickly pull this up so I can show you as soon as I find... There it is, RenderMan loaded. Give it a second to catch up. There it goes. Okay. Now in render settings, RenderMan, sampling, integrator. So we jump to occlusion to render our ambient occlusion pass. Then you want to go back to path tracer to get back to your regular render settings. So apologies there. All fixed. Whoops. There we go. Okay, so back to the idea of finishing your renders in Photoshop. LifeWire has this article about rendering additional passes, and then other things that you can do. So you can touch it up. You can add some kind of smoke to the scene, some haze, fire. If you want your robot to, for instance, be a sorcerer that has a fireball in his hand, you can add that in post because it's a whole lot easier to find a picture of a fireball than it is to make one in 3D. You can kind of embellish and add to your textures. You can add cracks. You can add labels and stickers and decals and racing stripes. And then on part 2, there's a bunch more you can do. You can just do a color grade like you would, any photo or video source, material. You can adjust the contrast, adjust the levels, the curves. You can make some tonal adjustments. You can add some light bloom. So the idea of light bloom is, I guess I typically see it in like a theater setting. Let me just find a reference image. Okay. There's light bloom is where the light kind of, it wraps around the edges of an object. Let's see what else we can find. Yeah. Okay, gives you an idea of what light bloom is. So you can add some of that. You can add chromatic aberration and vignetting, which we'll do. Noise and film grain. Again, these are designed to make it feel like this was taken with a real camera, not a 3D camera, because cameras in 3D space are basically perfect in that it's the imperfections that add that sense of realism. So that's what we'll be looking at. So here's my render. And the first thing that I want to do is add that occlusion pass over the top of this. So I've got my render opened up. Now I'm going to bring my occlusion pass. So I'm going to hold down Shift. It's going to drop it in the center. And And I don't think this was the right size. I know it's not the right size. I need to choose this one. There we go. I'm just going to drag that over the top. Hit enter. Okay, so I've got 2 layers. I've got my occlusion pass over the top. And you can see the differences here. I think the leg is probably the most obvious difference here. Okay, so it's a lot darker on the ambient occlusion pass. And this is just, it's factoring in, I don't remember if I was recording when I explained this last time, but ambient occlusion is a calculation for just how light will generally bounce around the room. It doesn't use the lights in the scene. It actually just kind of shoots rays out from all surfaces, and where those rays hit things, it makes the surface a little bit darker, and where the rays don't hit things, it makes them brighter. And so you get this lovely shadow pass that you can apply over the background. And the way to do that, stop talking around it. I'm just going to duplicate the background out of habit. Is you take your ambient occlusion pass. There we go. And we can just adjust the blending mode. So if I just do an overlay, it brightens the overall scene up. Okay, if I turn that off and back on, you can see it brightens the overall scene up, adds a little bit more contrast, and those shadows just give it more depth, which I quite like. Once you have it overlaid, then you can adjust the opacity if you don't want it to go quite so far, more or less. I think I'm going to keep it right there at the default 100%. I like the contrasty nature of that. You can really see it like on the underside of the arms, and the legs. Now, if you feel like, well, that doesn't really seem accurate because if this is a reflective surface, it's going to be reflecting that white, so it really shouldn't be making that part more in shadow. What you can do is, I'll just leave it there. Take your eraser, and I've got to make this layer rasterized. All right, you can take your eraser, make it a little bit larger, make it softer. Oops. And yeah, let me turn this to normal so we can evaluate this a little bit better. Instead of an eraser, I just want to lighten it. So I'm going to go to my colored, not color dodge, but my dodge tool. And I'm going to set my range to the shadows, make it a little bit smaller, and I'm just going to lighten that up a little bit. Okay, it's a real subtle adjustment, but I think it's an important one. So I'll go back to my overlay. We can look at our history. Oops, go here. See the before and after. Okay, so you're certainly welcome to make those changes as you go. You're not tied into exactly what that ambient occlusion pass says. That's the first step. Now, the way that I like to work in Photoshop is probably unnecessarily redundant, but it keeps things safe, and I can backtrack really easily. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to group these 2 layers, and I will call this AO for ambient occlusion. Then I'm going to duplicate, and the duplicated group I'm going to merge into one. There's a key command for that I can't remember. But you can just right click and merge the group. Okay, so now I've got this image. Now I can do the next thing that I want to do. And so I think what I'll do next is kind of play around with some of the tonalities here. I'm going to go to my adjustments panel, and one option that we have is the photo filter. And we can do just kind of general warming, cooling. If you're going for a specific kind of feel, you can do like a sepia. You can specifically adjust the color. If you really just want to get weird with it, you can adjust the density. I maybe wouldn't go quite so far. I'm a fan of subtlety, but ultimately it's whatever looks good and whatever is your preference. So yeah, that's one option that you can do to kind of adjust these colors. Another thing that you can do is we do like a gradient. So I'm working with the assumption that you all know generally how to use Photoshop. I'll create a new vignette, or not vignette, gradient. And we will call this, I don't know, overlay, why not? Okay, and I will do the kind of classic Hollywood blue and orange thing. I'm going to go kind of a deep blue there, and we'll go with a deeper orange there. Click OK. And then maybe something like that. So we'll keep the blue in the shadows. We'll make that a little bit larger there. Okay, that'll work. Oh, excuse me, I need to be that on its own layer so that I can blend them. Okay, something like that. And then we can do another overlay or a soft light. And then we can back the opacity off a little bit. Or you can add a layer mask by clicking that button right there. And you can paint with your layer mask. And, you know, kind of adjust that accordingly. Oops, I didn't like that. You can also set it and kind of tone the shadows. We just do curves. So you can open up curves that work the same way they work in every other application. So I'm going to turn off that overlay. And let's say we want the shadows to be a little bit more blue. So I'm going to boost them in the low end. We'll take them away in the high end. Take a little green out of the high end. Can leave it in the low end. Maybe we'll boost the reds a little bit too. Okay, it's all kind of preference to taste. This feels kind of, it's got a sense of nostalgia to it, which is interesting. I actually kind of like it, so I'm going to go with that. But I'm also going to go to, we've got a bunch of presets too, so you can play with those. I'm also going to go just overall and bring the high end down. I think the highlights are a little too much. Oops. Yeah, we'll just do maybe something like that. All right. Up next, I think I'm going to do a vignette over the top. Actually, vignette and chromatic aberration are going to kind of go hand in hand. So, again, I like to work in redundancies. Whoops, cancel. So I'm going to select those two layers. I'm going to group them. We'll name this grade for color grade. Duplicate and merge down. Hide that. I'll just tuck that away too. All right, so here, my grade copy, I'm going to go up to filter and lens correction. All right, this will open up a new window, and we've got auto correction, and then we have custom. And custom is what we want. Make sure you have the preview checkbox turned on in the bottom here, and then we can adjust our chromatic aberration. I like to go with the green magenta. That's kind of the more common one that I see. You can slide it kind of one way or the other, and you'll start to, you might have to zoom in here to really, whoops, I'll just zoom in here to really get a sense of it, but you'll see it on the fringes here. Okay, as you move it left and right. And it's going to be most obvious in the high contrast areas. And it, you know, it's kind of tough to overdo it using this method, which is a good thing, because I see it overdone a lot. But it gives, I like what it does here. It gives it kind of a older film look that I quite enjoy. You can also, in this very interface, give it a vignette. So I can just adjust the slider. If I bring it to the left, it's going to bring it's going to shade in the corners. or bring it to the right. It's going to make them brighter. So this kind of has a future spacey sort of feel, which again, I kind of like. Wasn't expecting to like that, but you can kind of go whichever direction you want. Then you can adjust the midpoint. So if you want to kind of bring it in and really isolate, or push it out just to the corners. If you don't want to do the vignette that way and you want to do it kind of your own way, then just leave that at 0, and I will show you how to do that a different way. And I'll show you that right now. Okay, so we've got adding that chromatic aberration, which again, I don't know how well this is going to translate either on YouTube or on the projector in the room, but here's the kind of before and after. It kind of dirties the edges a bit. Another thing that we can do, here's the alternate way to do a vignette, is I will just add a layer solid. Now, I'm going to go with a black vignette. It's kind of the traditional. If you want to, actually, no, I won't go with a black vignette. I'll mix it up because I can. I'm going to go with a deep blue vignette. So I've added a layer solid over the top. And then, in my color fill, I'm actually turn the opacity down a little bit so I can see what's going on. In the layer mask, I'm going to create an elliptical marquee. I'm going to feather it about 600 pixels. I'll just kind of draw across edge to edge. Something like, that's close enough, whatever. Oh, no pixels were selected. All right, we'll do it this way then. There. Oh, I have to rasterize the layer first. There we go. Okay. Can you tell Photoshop is not my primary program? Okay. Feather was up too high? I don't know. I rasterized the layer, turned my feather down. Now I'm going to set that to layer mask, and then I'm going to select my mask and hit Command I to invert it. And then I can adjust the opacity further from there. So I think that's actually a really nice kind of tonality. I like that a lot. Okay, bring that up too. So then maybe I will, I'll go through the same process here. Group it, and I'll call this one vignette. And then I will duplicate, turn off, merge down. Now up next, let's see, what else can we do to this? What we can do, we can add some film grain to this. And so the way that you do that is it's a filter, and then we go to noise and add noise. And I'm going to keep this monochromatic and do a Gaussian distribution. And we can kind of adjust the amount. Now that 12.5 is way too much. I want to be down something more like, even that's too much. Maybe 2, I think works kind of nice. The next thing we can do, if we really want to make this feel like it was taken with a film camera, which I seem to be going down that path, so why not embrace it, is we can overlay some dust and scratches. And that's going to take an additional texture, so I'm going to find that real quick. Found my dust and scratches texture. It looks like this, if you couldn't tell. So I will bring this over, and I should copy this to my folder. I'm not going to. Okay. I don't know why this brings it in so tiny. Oops. I'll scale it up over the top. Hit return, and then again we need to do a blending mode. So I think I'm really terrible about knowing which blending modes I'm supposed to use for given operations. So what I tend to do is just trial and error. It's usually between multiply, screen, overlay, and soft light are the ones that I use 90% of the time. So I can do that, which I quite like. But I am going to make one little adjustment. I don't want this to be uniform across the whole render. So I'm going to dive into my vignette, and I'm going to add the mask to my selection, scroll up to my dust and scratches layer, and click add mask. So now I've masked that layer in the same way. And so the dust and scratches become more apparent along the perimeter and less apparent in the center. And then, of course, you can, individually paint out specific dust and scratches if there are things there that you don't like. And I think that's just about all. Sorry about the fire drill. I think I'm in a pretty good place with this. I think the last thing that I just want to do is I'm going to take my original and move it up to the top. It wasn't all the way to the top. Make some room here. And I'll just toggle it on and off. So this is the before, and there's the after. Before and after. I think the after is a lot more interesting, personally. There's a lot you can do there. So that's one example. You can also let me open up another file. I'm not going to go through the full thing, but in this one, okay. So here, I added a Gaussian blur layer. So if I can disable the layer mask for a second. What I did is after I did my chromatic aberration, I duplicated the layer and applied a blur to the whole thing. Then I applied the layer mask over the top of it, and you can see, if we just look at the mask. Okay, this is what the mask looks like. So I'm leaving the blur on the edges, and I'm basically removing the blur from the center. Okay, so it gives me this kind of pseudo depth of field look, which I also enjoy. Another thing that you could do is if you wanted to, for instance, apply decals or things like that, is you can do that in post. And I'm going to do this on a clean version of this. Okay, so you can see why I will often duplicate. So I'm going to add like a NASA sticker right here. So I need to first find that image because I'm not prepared. NASA image. I guess full disclaimer, NASA does not endorse or support the activities of this here educational institution. Not that they oppose education, it's just that I'm using this without asking. But I like NASA and they're really awesome people, so I hope it's okay. So I've got this image and I want this to be a sticker on this cardboard box here. So first thing that I need to do is position it. I'm going to hit Command T to transform, scale it down a little bit. I'll put it something like over there. The next thing that I need to do is adjust the kind of the skew of it, I guess you could call it. So that would be in Edit and Transform. And I think we actually want Perspective. No, that wasn't. Oh, there we go. So kind of skew it a little bit, bring it up a little bit. I think that might have been a little too much. Oops. Okay. Again, not really my strong suit, and I should have just rendered a more straight-on image because that would make this a lot easier. But we'll pretend that that's where I want that to be. Up next, if you want this to really feel like kind of an older, more weathered image, is you can do some blending. So I'm going to open up or go to my layer style, go to my blending options. And this is like the coolest thing that I've ever learned in Photoshop, and that's this blend if section of the layer style. And how you adjust these sliders, you can see if I blend this layer, so if I bring the white down, it's going to knock out the white in the image, and I'll just see what's underneath. Same thing with the black there. But I can also do that with the underlying layer, which you can't tell too well. Okay. And you can kind of start to see where I'm going with this. But this is a little bit too, I guess, hard-edged. So if you hold down the Option key and click on this arrow, you can split it, and then it'll make it a gradient. So it'll kind of fade a little bit. And now that feels more like a worn kind of decal than a, just an image smacked on top. Okay. I think that is just one of the coolest things you can do in Photoshop, but I'm easily impressed, so you may not be as impressed as I am. Okay, but you can do that after you get that in place. You could add some additional kind of dirt and grunge over the top of it. And then you can also, can merge those together. And then kind of go through the same process that we did before. I'm going to duplicate the layer. I'm going to blur it. And I will do a Gaussian blur. We don't need to do much. Maybe something like that will work. Okay. And I'm going to add that mask to the selection, and then I'm going to go here, and then I'm going to apply that mask there. And suddenly that doesn't look nearly as good, so I'm going to undo that. I'm going to deselect. I'm going to go to my rectangular marquee. And let's say I want this to be in focus. Actually, undo. I'll do this instead. I'm just going to apply the mask. B to bring up my brush, make sure it's nice and soft. Oops. Make it a little bit larger and just kind of go right across the center there. And I'll just paint it in myself. Like that. And make sure that that's still blurry. All right. Then I think we need to, let's see, group, duplicate, make sure you name things. I'm going to merge that together. And then maybe we need, I think we need some curves here. Everything is feeling very flat. Get some contrast in there. Okay. And you can go on and do the same other things that we did before. So, key takeaway here is just how we apply that sticker with the blending options. With the sticker, instead of just blending what's underneath, you could then additionally over the top adjust the mask, or give it a layer mask, and kind of add some like paint chips to it and the like. Come on, there we go. So if I choose one of these more textured brushes here, maybe something like, I don't know, that, and Oh. Oh, it's because I'm not actually adjusting the sticker. I'm adjusting the whole layer. That's all right. You can go in and kind of erase some of the edges of the sticker and roughen it up and make it a little bit more organic. So those are some of the things you can do in Photoshop to kind of give your renders a finished feel. Certainly find more reference images, movie posters, movies, any really stylized image that you like, and try to replicate it and see what you can come up with.